What is the present status of women in deployment and development of AI? And what would be is there, many argue that there's an underrepresentation of women in these fields. And what do you think would be the probable impact of such underrepresentation?
So in 2017, I published a paper that I'd actually been working on for like a decade, I think maybe even longer. But we finally had a paper that came out in Science that showed that human implicit biases are the same kinds of biases that AI absorbs. And what's more, that they reflect our lived experience. So I was talking about that before. So when we were testing that, in fact, it was my idea, which, like I said, I've been working on for decades, that as soon as I found out about implicit biases, I thought, you're going to find that in large corpus linguistics, which is what we used to call what turned into LLM. Okay, so I've been testing that basically with undergraduates. So it wasn't kind of my main thing I did. And then we finally got to this point where, and I was on sabbatical at Princeton, and I'm working with these other people. And one of them was up for tenure the next year. So 𝐈𝐧𝐿𝐴 did a lot of the hard work and had some ideas. But one of his core ideas also came from 𝐅𝐮𝐭𝐮𝐬𝐢𝐯𝐞. So he was up for tenure the next year. And we were all surprised how strong the result was. I mean, unfortunately, usually in science, you're only a little right. And we were too right. We were like terrified, right? So he said, let's check this against something we know is true. So let's check this against the US labor statistics. Okay, so now we come back to your question. So I used to be a programmer in the 1980s, right? And when I was a programmer, it was kind of unusual to be a woman, but it turned out at that time, it was about 12% of programmers. And it was increasing. So I was a programmer for 5 years. And during that time, there were more and more women. And so I wasn't that worried. That was like the rest of society in the 60s and 70s, right? It turned out that by 2017, only 4% of programmers were women. And I think that's horrible. It turned out that it had peaked around 17 or 18%, and then it collapsed around 2000. So some people were saying that was because women are more risk averse, and that that was when the dot-com crash happened. But that just doesn't make sense because it was decades. It was like 2017. It was, okay, not decades, 15 years after the dot-com crash. And so I actually wonder if part of what happened was as software became a much larger industry, there was this trend to open plan offices. And I wonder if somehow it's worse to be one of the few women in an open plan office that is to be like I was. When I was a programmer, I had my own office, right? And I was able to concentrate, and nobody hassled me, And so, I mean, I had colleagues, they were all male, but they were great, but we only went to lunch together. It wasn't like we saw each other all the time, right? So anyway, I don't know what happened, but I do think this is a big problem. It's a real loss of creativity. I mostly feel it is a loss to the women. It's such a fantastic creative job, and I really, really enjoy it. And so I think we need to find that. But in terms of like, is that part of why, the problems we see are there? It has to be, I would like to believe that women would notice things. But honestly, those of us who are sort of embedded in very male environments, we might not notice. Another story from that period, that one day they put up, this is an American story, there was this thing about softball on the wall. And it wasn't me that noticed, it was one of the men that noticed that it said men's softball and girls softball, that the women were diminished. And we all said, we called each other girls. I didn't so much, it was more a generation older than me. But I didn't think it was weird because it was what my mother and my grandmother did. So I think sometimes that on the one hand, it is a huge issue. It shows us injustice. It shows us an opportunity for millions of women, and we are seeing, billions of women, right? But we are seeing more and more women going into this. So we have changed some of the stereotypes, and it's wonderful when we highlight women who are successful scientists and successful programmers and successful, presidents and everything else. It's wonderful because you do see more people going into that. But I honestly think that the things we have to do are systemic, and making those protections. I do think that all of us have both obligations and opportunities to think hard and be inclusive.